Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TrueMindShifters channel. Today, we are welcoming a beautiful inside and outside guest, Gina Sevey, and we will be talking about a very interesting topic, word no.
In this channel, we share true stories of our own lives to help people overcome fear, shame, and guilt. And this sounds easy, maybe, but it isn't. And we are super proud to be able to share our stories. We've realized almost 10 months into this that this takes a lot of courage to talk about what we are truly feeling, what we are truly denying in some cases, and to admit that we're on a journey to overcome huge challenges that are in our hearts and minds. So we are honored to have and feature our monthly catalyst in the month of November, focusing on the word no and looking at no in terms of how it can help us, how we might need to revisit our relationship with no. And in this particular catalyst conversation, we're going to dig into the topic of grief. We are thrilled to have you, Gina. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. We know that we've talked about how who we are, it's the same personally and professionally. Just because we walk into a building doesn't change who we are. And I'm really looking forward to exploring the concept of, the experience of grief, which is part of life, and what led you to where you are in your life to talk about this topic and wherever our conversation goes. So, Gina, welcome to True Mind Shifters.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Such an honor. I will say that I am Gina, and I am a life coach. I started out my journey as a life coach in 2019. I was really in a place of I just unhappy. I just couldn't, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and of course it was always anything that was exterior. Everybody else was the problem. And come to find out I was the problem. Not the problem, but more I was at cause. Like I realized like what I was creating was not what I truly wanted. I wanted a life that, was vibrant and joy filled. Um, uh, and I talked about, like I'm a Christian and I believed, like Jesus said, you have this abundant life. And I was not seeing abundance. I was seeing a lot of scarcity. And so I just dove into personal development, and I wound up listening to a lot of podcasts, and I found a woman on this one podcast that I had shared with you guys that I had at the end of the podcast. It was like, DM me if you want to get together. And I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm going to do it. And so I DM'd her and I was like, I think I need to meet with you. And so I met with her and she told me how much it was going to cost. And I was like, I'm going to figure it out. I went home. My husband had just lost his job. And I came home and I said, I'm going to get a life coach. And he was like, I'm sorry, what? And I'm like, no, I have never invested in myself ever. And I'm going to do this. And so I'll figure it out. And I did. And I think I was like in maybe the third or fourth month. And she said, have you ever thought of life coaching yourself? And I was like, well, I've had people tell me, but I don't even know how to do it. And she's like, well, just do this. And I was like, oh. And I remember going back to work the next day, and I work for a therapy office. And I said to one of the therapists, I said, I'm going to be a life coach. And she said, well, I'm going to be your first client then. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, you've been coaching me for the last year, Gina. So let me pay you. So that was kind of the beginning. And then I just kind of kept, kind of going, but there was still something within me that was like, I just knew wasn't whole. And kind of was putting it off on my spouse, like, if you would do this, then I would, be this, and we'd be happy. And yeah, and really,
How familiar.
it's like, and he was kind of like, I'm fine. Like, and I'm like, no, you're not. If you would do this, then we would be better. But long story short, within that time, Lou wound up getting cancer. And I remember talking a lot about at the time, like, if you want to have this abundant life, you have to see your abundant life where you're at right now. You can't just be like, well, once I get here, then I'm going to be, this. Everything's going to be great. But I wasn't feeling that. And I could not, I had no way, like in my brain, I was like, I don't know what I like. I don't know what makes me happy. And a lot of that comes from my childhood, for sure. And I could see other people just, and my husband, I believe that God gave me my husband, because that man, he just would be like, fun was, his thing. And I, early on, was shamed about having fun, and so fun became like bad for me. And it was this place where, like, I felt I always had to be productive. If you were productive, then you were good. Fun was kind of like that, it's decadent. And so a lot of shame around having fun. And I learned as time went on, like, oh, our brain, it's designed to listen to what we tell it, right? So every time that I kept saying fun is wrong, and we would go and do something, I would always like shrink back, from the fun. Thank goodness for Lou, because he was a lot of fun. And that's what attracted me to him. And I think that's probably where the problem came, because he was so much fun and I was like misproductive, and it was just an interesting way that, two people connected, right? Well, within this time, as I was coaching, Lou's cancer, so he had melanoma cancer, and that cancer, he wound up getting went into adrenal crisis and almost died. And, but he was actually, he got out of cancer. He wound up going to remission. It was awesome. And so this was like in July of 2023, September, he found a spot on his arm, and October had surgery. November went and got a brain scan, and that brain scan, I believe, just pushed everything. He wound up really, really bad headache November 3rd. Really awful. So that was a Saturday, Sunday, terrible. He thought it was sinuses. By Monday, I was like, we're taking you to the ER. Took him to the ER, wound up finding out after the ER guy sent us to this ophthalmologist who had melanoma cancer, mind you. And he was like, I'm going to look at this MRI. Something's up. And he said he was up all night. And he's like, I knew something was wrong. And he found his cancer was behind his eye. By that point, Lou, we're now, getting, immunotherapy, radiation, and it was just awful, awful, awful. So we're at November, December, January 23. Lou passed away. He died. Me as a productive person found myself doing things after Lou died, and I kept questioning myself, am I grieving the right way? Because I kept hearing like all these people telling me, like, oh, I, was doing this and I was doing that. And this is what I did when my husband passed away or whatever. And I was like, oh, I'm doing that. Like, am I doing it wrong? So there, another little shame piece, for me. And I've had to really look at myself during this whole grieving process. And I started to share on Instagram about grief. I started to be very, very clear. Like, I wanted to teach people what I'm experiencing. And if you're experiencing something like this is okay. There is it's just love. Honestly, there's no right or wrong way. I'm teaching about love, loving myself in this, learning about secondary grief, learning about, just it's not necessarily a how to, it's just to be. We're human beings, not human doings, right? And I had spent my whole life being a human doing. And now I'm at this human being spot in my life.
I can relate so much. It sounds like I have been a human doing for a very long time because I've been working since a very young age. And like you, I can relate so much. Yeah, I at certain point forgotten. Well, no, I was actually taught that fun is not good. You have to be productive. And because I've been working so much all my life, my son, when he grew up and became a teenager, uh, he started telling me, Mom, I can't relax. If I'm relaxing, I feel guilty that I'm not doing anything because it feels wrong. And I had to work really, really hard with him, constantly asking him to please not feel this way, to the point that I can admit now, there were times when when he would wake up in the morning and say, I'm so tired, but I have to go to school. I said, no, you don't. He's like, no, I have to. I'll have a miss. I'm like, it's okay. I'll call the school. And I have many times. You know why? Because we were skipping high school, like all kids do. We were signing slips without, instead of our parents. Couldn't even speak English at the time. I'm not a hypocrite. So yeah, and you know what? I'm glad I did because those days did not change anything. He graduated 4.5 GPA. He finished high school in 3 years as opposed to 4. He's in university. And even now, I constantly remind him to stop, to slow down, to shut. And he's like, he's a workaholic. He's a workaholic. Everybody says that. And I'm like, stop, stop, stop. For the same reason as what you're saying. It looks like for many, many people, we're human doings, not human beings. Just wanted to go back to the grief part because it was a traumatic experience for you. And I understand you haven't shared a lot on camera, but you and I, we both know how traumatic that experience was for you, for losing your best friend, your partner, your husband, the father of your children, your best friend, your lover. When you were questioning yourself, whether you were doing it right or wrong, right? First question is, why were you even thinking that way? Was it because other people were telling you something that they grieved the way that didn't resonate well with you, or was there another reason? And second question is, how were you able to do something with it, meaning something productive, something different, something that you're doing right now?
So I remember one of my friends whose husband passed away. She was like, "Oh, I was in my pajamas for 6 months, and I was, um, like I didn't even take a shower." And and then another person, I'd go to work and then come home, and I would just go to bed. And And I found myself like every day getting up, taking a shower, putting makeup on, getting ready for the day. And I remember being downstairs in the kitchen and I was doing something and I looked at my daughter and I said, "Do you think I'm grieving?" She was like, "What?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, like you couldn't catch me without a tear in my eye, like I would be like looking at something and feel sadness, for losing Lou. And but I was still getting up every day. And she said, Mom, which is, I love our children because I think our kids can speak so much wisdom into us, Uh, and let me preface this with, we live all together, like my family lives all together. And those beautiful women that I talked about, they were alone. And so it was different. We live in a family community. So it was like a community of, we're all within this pocket of grief, right? And she said, I think that if you were laying in bed for 6 months, we'd be like, Mom's broke. And she's like, that's just not who you are. And you see things, um, you it's like the dichotomy of joy and grief, like or maybe just the fact that there's joy and grief and it coexists, right? So yeah, we would be doing things and then we'd laugh and you know um and then cry in the next moment, so because I think community is what really helped me keep from, and I saw that and I was like, oh, that's why, because I have everybody here and I'm able to cry and I'm also able to just be who I am. I did notice that I was in a lot of a fog, um, for several months. And I don't think people really talk about that kind of stuff, that there's a thing that happens in our brain when we have a traumatic event. And we do have moments of like, you kind of think like, oh my gosh, I'm like, am I getting dementia? Like I'm forgetting everything, but it's actually trauma. And I'm learning all of these things that we're just not talking about. We're not sharing with people who go back to work 3 days after their loved one dies, and then they get fired because they're not doing the job they used to be able to do so well. It's just like, oh my gosh, if people would know, like, you're going to get this person back, but they're not going to be the same person. They're a different person now.
And you mentioned this level of denial, right? And is there a right way to do it? But I certainly appreciate your calling out that there's a denial going on. And to think that reasonably any person in the course of 3 to 4 days is going to be able to be productive back at work, everything's a-okay, is just delusional. But that's
Totally.
our system, right?
Yep.
And
Mhm.
so I'm sure the way in which you're sharing your story of your own experience, I'm sure is helping many, many people. And even the idea that there isn't one right way, but there's a process that people are going through is certainly meaningful. So you have shared a lot on Instagram. And the can you share more about this process of how it is to share about grief? And what are you noticing about yourself as you share more about grief?
So I'm a creative person. I'm a singer, and I when Lou was you know dying, I was journaling. I was just journaling everything. And someone had sent me like, you should share on this care site. And it's for people who are grieving. And I was just sharing and people were reading it. And I noticed that people were very interested in it, but it was also very cathartic for me. And I I went from doing that to starting to like showcase it where it is like showing myself on Instagram. And for instance, one night I was just grilling. I was just out there grilling, and the wind was kind of hitting me, and the moon was, and it was dark, and I was out there, and there was a part of me that was like, I have to do this. Lou, like Lou should be here. He loved grilling. And I started going through this whole thing. And, there's a moment, I believe, for people who have gone through something similar, that you feel very alone, even when you're not. You don't know how to express it. And I think for me, I just started videotaping myself grilling, because I was like, there's something here. And I just kept that videotape. And then I sat down like the next day and I just started writing, like about this moment, but also about like how we can get so caught up in the why me, or why is this happening to me, versus, embracing what is. And so I started to write about that. And I think for me, it's just very cathartic. And also, I believe, because people are engaging with it, that people are also feeling these same things. I had no idea that me going and getting, a certified to be a coach and, do all this mind work, I had no idea how that was going to impact where I'm at today in my grief. I love telling stories. I just do. I love, and I think stories really speak to people. And just that one moment, I had a story that I could share. And that's why I just feel like I feel really honestly like in its appointment for me. Like I'm supposed to be doing this. And when that stops and there's something else, I think a lot of times people get really caught into like, this is our niche, Well, I don't want to say this is my niche. This is just an appointed time for me. And I really believe that. And so because I love being creative, I'm just, taking the opportunity to just share through that creative process. And we're really blessed to have something like that, to be able to be creative, right? So that's kind of why it just sparked in me. I'm like, I'm just going to start doing this. And anyway. Yeah.
So when you started doing this, first of all, thank you for sharing. It's really beautiful. When you started doing this, how did it make you feel? What kind of what were there any responses? Were there any comments? Where is that right now?
So there's two things, especially when we want to talk about, shame or guilt. There was a part of me that I think I told you, I didn't want people to think like, oh, I'm showcasing myself, right? I'm making something out of grief. What's the word? Like I don't want to dishonor my husband, and have people be like, oh, like gross, like, and so I kind of had to work through that, where I was like, you know what? This is my life and this is my story. And if you don't like it, guess what? Just scroll past it. I have not had that. I don't know. Honestly, I've had some people say, I love what you do. This is so great. Family members. But I don't know, to be honest with you, if someone doesn't like it, there's nothing I can do about that, right? I just know, like, this is my story and I get to share it. And I've never been that way. I've always been less of like, don't be so vulnerable. I'm beyond vulnerable. I'm sharing things, deep thoughts, that I feel like I think this needs to be out there. And if somebody doesn't like it, I guess they're just going to scroll past. Or if they comment, guess what I get to do? Delete the comment. And that was a process for me because I'm a pleaser. And when you want to please everybody, you don't show up fully as yourself.
I love how you said it's your story, because that's the truth, first of all, but it's also an empowering statement that for whatever reason, people attempt, or maybe not intentionally, as they raise us, as they interact with us, attempt to, or it's a byproduct maybe of in their own insecurities, they squelch our stories, right? Or our experience or our joy, or lots of different things with their shoulds, right? So the shame and the expectations of what people should be doing. I love that you own your story. You realize that your story is your story, and you're not looking for validation.
No,
So, Marina and I, as we talk and we listen to different catalysts and your story, thank you for being so vulnerable and open and clear. It helps people get little tidbits, and just the decision you made to share your story, to own your story, and that you present your story in a way that it can be honored, because you're A, very open, and B, you own it. And you don't owe anyone anything.
While being super traumatized, while processing your own emotions and grief, opening yourself up to possibly more of a negativity. No, right? No, you're not doing this right. No, you shouldn't be talking about it. No, this is not the way to process your trauma. No, we as a society have different perspective.
totally. It's just so interesting, how we as Americans, and I shared with this already, that, we don't really, we don't know how to do it. We're not taught to do it. And in other cultures, I think if we Americans actually looked at other cultures and how other cultures actually grieved and how they did the grieving process, it would give us so much more freedom. But because we are wanting to stay in this little box, and like put grief over here, we even, it's interesting because, I think about how people feel very isolated in their grief, because initially people will show up with their condolences. Initially, they'll show up to help you through something, right? After the third month, people drop off. And you as a person will say, well, I mean, I get it, because they got to move on with their lives. But deep down inside, you feel a little like, oh, you're forgotten, like they forgot. And it's almost like, well, it's been long enough now, we've put enough into this, and I know that's not in their intention, but because we don't do it with the intention of, like, another culture is very communal. And just like I said, because we all live together, it's a community.
Yeah. No.
What would you say to someone who's going through cancer, and cancer has either affected them directly or a loved one?
Can I tell you a story? My husband was sitting on the bed, and my husband died at home, not in a hospital. And he was sitting on the bed, and he couldn't see because his eye was actually being pushed out because of the cancer. So he had a patch on his eye, and I was folding laundry, which I find so interesting. It was probably maybe 4 weeks before he died, but I didn't know that. I'm folding laundry, and I asked him, I said, do you know what's going on, honey? And he said, yes, I'm dying. And I said, are you scared? Because I was scared. And he said, no. And then I dropped the socks that I was folding, and I went over to the side of the bed and just sat there with him. And he just said, I'm going to miss you the most. And then we just cried. And I think if I was to tell anybody anything, is that what I saw in my husband, he was not scared to die. There was grief for him. He was very, very sad that he was leaving all of us, but he wasn't afraid. So I would say that there is no fear in dying. And if I was the person like myself losing somebody, I would just share as much as you can with that person, how much you love them, how much they meant to them, I will tell you, you never bring up the things that bugged you about that person. All the things that you're holding on to, if you have bitterness or anything, like you don't think about any of that in those moments. You think only about the love. And that, to me, it just really shines through that all the things that are the arrows that are coming down to try and destroy a relationship or whatever you're going through, to be very aware of those arrows because they're trying to destroy it. Where when you're in the place of true dying and being in the presence of death, you don't think about all those things. You don't think one moment about anything that, and it's almost like you're protected in a sense. And I would just share with those people that are going through that, it's you allow yourself to feel whatever you want to feel. We get to do that. We get to feel it. We get to cry. We get to shout. We get to be angry. We get to shake our fists at God and do all the things that we are feeling. So whatever you're feeling, you get to do that. And no one gets to tell you that you can't.
Thank you.
I was just thinking this month of November, and you're speaking about this. My father passed away 30 years ago from cancer. And November 6th would have been his birthday. It's been 30 years since he passed away. For the first 10, I couldn't start even speaking about him without crying. 10 years. I'm emotional right now because it would have been his 85th birthday. He died really young. He was 54 years old. See, even now, what I was going to say, the couple of years of his death are erased in my brain. I have to physically go to calendar and start mapping out to understand the dates. And when I try to recall where I worked, what I was doing, there are just a couple of pieces that I can. 30 years. I was young. It is critical to address that issue of not being able to grieve properly, in the sense of properly, fully, not properly. I hate that word. I'm sorry I even said that. Fully. And I love how you have said, what would you say to cancer patients and their loved ones? Because what I was thinking when you were talking about your late husband is that the cancer patient survivors are traumatized almost as much as the patients themselves, because there is that feeling of complete inability to change anything, to do anything, to change the course of the disease for the loved one. This is such a big topic, and I am so grateful that you are taking it to Instagram, and we will definitely share all your information so people can reach out. In my own family, 3 months ago, we lost a very close person to cancer. And he was an amazing person, and we remember him. We have cancer survivors as well. That trauma is ongoing for
It
years.
is. Yes. I think that uh, it's really good to recognize that you have gone through a traumatic event and you will have PTSD and you will have all those emotions that come up and I do think that is why I'm sharing what I'm sharing. It's very, like I said, cathartic for me to be like, oh, that's an interesting one that I'm feeling. I'm going to share that. I was I was walking with my kids. We do a lot of hiking here. I live in Oregon, and they're avid hikers. And we were at like a top part of this one hill, and they were like, "Oh, let's go down. The river's down here." And they were just like bounding down like little bunnies, you know. Bleep, bleep, bleep. Took the dog, my son, and I was acting as if there was a landmine every single step. You know, I was like, "Okay, I'm going down," and and then got to the bottom, and I was like, "Whew." And my son said, "Oh, mom, do you really get scared going down?" And I was like, "Yeah, weird, huh?" And then I realized as I was going up, I was bounding up. And I thought to myself, interesting how going up felt really natural, almost exhilarating, right? Each step, like it was like a challenge and I embraced it, but going down,
Mm,
that was different. Every step I was cautious, every rock was a potential slip. You know, I was fearing falling, right? Losing control. And then I felt like it just hit me. It's not the climb that scares us, it's the descent.
mm,
We're afraid of the moments when things seem to go downhill. And I think that's when we say the no word comes into play. It's like, no, I'm not going to feel that.
mm,
I'm not going to embrace that because I might fall completely. And it's really like allowing yourself to feel that. And I feel like that's where the growth is, learning to trust yourself in the descent, finding strength in the parts that you don't feel like you're steady.
And your analogy and visual and physical experience is so powerful because it also calls out what we can be seeking, right? So noticing that we're afraid, but seeking balance. Because when you have balance, right, you're more sure-footed. And of course, a slope and some loose rocks, you're going to need to pay more attention as you descend. And walking is literally falling forward, but when you add a slope and some loose stuff under your feet, yeah, you have to be a little careful. You increase your chance of falling and getting hurt. But
Mhm.
balance helps with so many things. And I can't help but think about, at least for myself, I'm taking away this notion of how important it is to create balance even in these moments or times of what seems to be everything falling apart and or extreme loss and or the fight. Because the other thing that we witness as people who are survivors of losing people in our family to cancer is we are witnessing the fight, the months and or years of the fight against cancer.
Yep.
And like Marina said, this element of feeling a bit powerless. And so I'm struck by the importance of balance, the message of acceptance. And then when you were talking about the bubble of love,
Mm.
I hope that that really helps people's hearts and minds, and how important it is that we, well, and how naturally the small stuff, the negative stuff will fall away. And so in some ways, you're reminding us of what is pure about someone's passing, is that we will remember and be surrounded by and hopefully have our hearts filled with that love.
Yeah.
Gina, we ask our catalysts a very important question, and we're going to wrap it up with this question with you. And that question is, if you could whisper one thing to the fear in your mind, what is the one thing you would whisper?
I think the thing that I would whisper is that it's all working out for you. It's already in play. And funny you mentioned that, because I woke up in the middle of the night going, oh no, for myself, like, oh gosh, like I had like fearful thoughts. And I've really been, there's a scripture that I've been quoting like over and over again, like, God doesn't give you a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind. And I I really do believe that it's working for me. Like everything is working for me. It's all going to work out. And I just need to keep being in the presence of that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Gina, for sharing who you are with us, sharing your stories, being so open and vulnerable, helping so many people through your authentic sharing. And thank you, Marina, for always asking such powerful questions. And then I do want to share thanks with Oak, because Oak introduced us to Gina. So
Yes.
we thank you, Oak, and we'll wrap it up there.
And I wanted to thank Eva for having such deep and profound line to take us through, always keeping us intact, keeping us on the path. And for introducing us to Oak, who introduced us to Gina, because I feel like we are going to do more together. And Gina, I also wanted to thank you for being so authentic, because it is not easy.
Thank you.
And we are grateful for everyone here. This will be our final set of stories for the year of 2024 as we regroup and consider how the stories we've shared so far help you and how else we can help you. We look forward to a new exciting year of 2025 and other ways we can help people truly shift their minds to live in a happier life and to create that life with the people around you.
We thank you for being part of our channel and follow our stories. And we're sending you support, empowerment, and love.